Good afternoon. The Performance Committee will now come to order. We are convened as of 1:33 p.m. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this hour. Please note that until further notice, the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely via Zoom and will be available and will be audio and video recorded. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com to access meeting recordings and unofficial meeting minutes. The live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during this afternoon's meetings, I would ask you to please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you before proceeding to speak. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their virtual hands to indicate that they would like to speak by pressing *9. To toggle your mute setting on the phone, press *6. I would now like to call the roll for committee members. Director Busick.
Here.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Sloan.
Here.
Director Lewis. I am here. Director Lewis. For the record, I see that we have 4 directors present, 1 absent. I would like to open public comment to anyone who would like to address the committee regarding the topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you are dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted in writing. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the committee, or if any member of the public would like to submit written comments, please email those to the board office at the following email address: rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During public comment, the committee will not offer comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Ms. McManus, do we have any speakers in the queue?
We have no speakers in the queue, and I have not been notified that there are any emails on this topic.
Wonderful, thank you. For the sake of the record, I'd like to acknowledge that we've been joined by Director Geisinger, as well as Director Cook and Director Rivera-Malpietti. I think that's everyone from the board side. Great. With no participants in the queue, we'll close public comment period at this time. This brings us to our recommended action, which is the 2023 GM CEO Performance Appraisal Criteria and Weighting. For the Board of Directors to approve the performance appraisal criteria for the performance period commencing January 1st, 2023 and ending December 31st, 2023, and for each performance period thereafter. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
I have Director Sloan as the mover. Any second?
Second.
And Chair Busick as the second. I'd like to ask Deborah A. Johnson, General Manager and CEO, to present this item.
Thank you very much, Chair and committee members, and to all those who are virtually assembled. As introduced, I'm Deborah Johnson, the General Manager and CEO. Today, I am presenting a recommended action for your consideration, which is to approve the General Manager and CEO performance appraisal criteria for the performance period commencing January 1st of 2023 and ending December 31st of 2023, and for each performance period thereafter. Pursuant to the terms of the Chief Executive Officer and General Manager Employment Agreement, it states, beginning on November 1st, 2022, and each November 1st thereafter, for the remainder of the agreement, Ms. Johnson shall propose any suggested amendments to the weighted success outcomes, organizational values, or goals. On Tuesday, November 1st, I informed Committee Chair Lewis, you, Vice Chair Deschelle, in your capacity as the Vice Chair of the committee, as well as the board chair via email, that for the 2023 performance period and subsequent periods, I suggested a minor modification to my evaluation criteria, which is as follows. For the performance period commencing January 1st, 2023, and for each subsequent performance period thereafter, the annual performance appraisal score will be comprised of 50% objective success outcomes associated with their respective strategic priorities, with equal weight being given to each, and 50% subjective organizational values as adopted by the board pursuant to the strategic plan, including any amendments thereto. Essentially, the only change for the 2023 performance period and beyond is the evaluation of my performance with respect to the success outcome for employee ownership, given that the second employee survey will be conducted in the second quarter of 2023. By establishing a second data point to be used in my year-end evaluation, the performance committee and eventually the board will be able to objectively assess my progress towards that success outcome. Hence, this action before you is memorializing my recommended minor revision. If approved by the committee, the item will then be considered by the full board during the special board meeting currently scheduled for Tuesday, December 6, 2022. Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. At this time, I'd like to ask those directors who have questions or who wish to speak to raise your virtual hands, and I'll call on you in turn. For directors or staff calling into the meeting, if you wish to speak, please press *9. Director Sloan.
Thank you, Madam CEO, GM or GM CEO. I think this is an extremely reasonable request. The only question it raises in my mind is, I know the survey for 2022 employee ownership establishes the baseline. Has that been completed? And if not, when will it be completed and we can see the results of that survey?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Yes, so Director Sloan, thank you very much for that question. That information was presented to this body back in September. That was completed in, sorry, I stand corrected. It was completed in May. We presented that, yes, when we came forward in September. And more specifically, the employee survey was done intentionally to coincide with the service change due to the fact that 2/3 of our workforce are representative employees. And past experience has basically yielded that there is a broader level of participation as we have our frontline staff that physically come into the divisions to conduct their bids. So to your question, there is a baseline that's been established that has been shared. And subsequently, when we do the second round of employee survey, we then can denote whether or not improvements to that baseline have been made.
Well, there is a hole in my brain where that employee survey belongs. Could you send me those or have someone send me those results?
Yes, I will ask the board staff to resend that information to you that was presented, not just to you, but we will recirculate that to this entire committee.
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
Director Sloan, you all set? Great. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, I listened in on the APTA board, the committee that Doug Tisdale chairs. And we had a presentation on the Eugene, Oregon land transit division or department, granted a smaller transit, but the presentation showed something very similar to that which we are doing here. They embarked upon a strategic plan, had 5 pillars of success outcomes, a very similar process to what we had here. One thing that I took notice of was that they said that the staff had not completed their employee survey. And so they weren't able to assess that. And as a result, the evaluation that was given, the agency and the CEO was a 0 for that particular piece. And I know that we're kind of lagging and we were establishing a baseline, so I'm not suggesting that we do that. But I want to make sure that we do get that employee survey in a timely fashion so that we can adequately evaluate our GM CEO's performance next year. Just, I don't know what we would have. I'm sure we would have some assurances that would get done, but I just want to make sure that we don't let it slip. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
So thank you very much, Director Catlin, for your questions. Just for everybody's clarity, you were referencing the APTA, American Public Transportation Association Transit Board Member Subcommittee, and to that end, also Lane Transit. So recognizing the question in which you posed, I'd be remiss in stating that as we look at our organization, people are the most important aspect of what comprises us as an agency, and recognizing that we're people moving people. And in light of our employee ownership strategic priority, trust and believe that that will not fall to the wayside. We've already established a baseline. We have engaged with our employee ownership task force and our employee ownership solutions group who are working on a myriad of initiatives outlined from the basis of that employee survey. So as I indicated in my previous comments, as we go forward, we have a baseline established. We are basically having that in alignment with our service change that occurs in the May timeframe. So when you receive my self-evaluation, if I'm still sitting in this seat next year, that information will be incorporated with the information that you received previously. So we would have every single strategic priority incorporated into the information which you would use to assess my skills, knowledge, and abilities as it relates to my performance. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I just wanted some assurances that we would get there, and I knew that we would. I just wanted to make that statement publicly because other agencies have dealt with it a little differently. And you are right. On the tip of my tongue, I couldn't remember Tisdale's committee, but that is the correct name for the committee.
Thanks, Director Catlin. Director Cook.
Thank you for letting me ask a question or two here. So I'm still trying to discern what the changes are. We going from 25% based on the subjective criteria for organizational values up to 50%? Is that a change? I'm just not clear about where the changes are from and to the prior amendment.
No, Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So Director Cook, a point of clarification, recognizing we did not have a second wave of data to use to assess whether or not I moved the needle as related to employee ownership, this body and subsequently the board acted on an amendment. Therefore, it stated that there were only 3 strategic priorities. All I did was put forward a recommendation saying that we will have 4 strategic priorities upon which I would be assessed, i.e. community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success.
Okay, so it's kind of going back to the system we had previous to the amendment this year.
That is correct.
Okay, got it. And then just a quick question for Melanie Snyder, if I may. When the last, maybe it was the 4th amendment, where we asked the staff to conduct a benchmark survey, we substituted the 6% for some wording that said like compensation increase. And my thought or understanding at the time was that we would do the benchmark study as a way to inform what that percentage and this breakdown would be. But we're adopting this tonight before we get the benchmark results. Am I missing something there?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
Thank you, Director Cook, for that question. And we'll go over this a little bit in the discussion item when I review the GM and CEO's contract. But you're correct. We, or the board with the 3rd amendment, that's actually on packet page 27. There is a reference to a compensation analysis being conducted. So our vendors from Gallagher are here with us today. They're going to present that analysis. The board then also with that amendment in Exhibit B, that's on package page 31, established the percentage criteria distribution. So for the 2020 performance period, you're right, there was a 6% base increase that was put into that amendment. Going forward, so starting for performance period January 1, 2023 going forward, the board will be utilizing information from the compensation survey to establish what percentage increase will be on the table And then the percentage distributions that you see in Exhibit B to the third amendment, those will then guide you on how to distribute whatever percentage the board lands on.
For this year, for the coming 2020.
For the coming year, yes.
All right, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Oops.
Thank you, Director Cook. And I will just take one moment before calling for the vote of Chair-esque privilege to comment here, which is in conducting this year's review, we looked at the financial success outcome, and Director Geisinger also sort of drew my attention to this. And there's an element of subjectivity based on how it's currently written. So for financial success, 50% of the outcome is that RTD spends less money than it receives. That's objective. The latter half, 50% of outcome, is that the community believes that it sees value in RTD spending, introduces an element of subjectivity because it asks the question, forces directors to evaluate and ask the question, well, what is the community? We also did not directly survey this question. We surveyed whether we thought RTD was a good user of public funds. We surveyed whether the community thought that its investment in RTD was valuable. But we did not survey whether the community believes that RTD's spending is valuable. And so I don't think this has to be addressed today necessarily, but I do think before we get to this evaluation period next year, that we should establish those thresholds to remove that element of subjectivity from the objective analysis, or from what should be an objective analysis. If anyone has any thoughts on, we should address that sooner. And Ms. Johnson, what are your thoughts on sort of addressing that as we look to the next year? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I support that. And there have been conversations amongst us as staff as we look at our strategic planning and basically recognizing that this was going to be an evolutionary process, literally and figuratively. The name of the document is Challenge, Change, and Connections. And you cannot spell the word challenge without the word change. So I say that to say I'm amenable to the approach as we have conversations and bring something back for you all's consideration. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Catlin.
Director Deschel, I completely support that, putting more objectivity into that criteria, because I think we hear from different stakeholders, different perceptions of the value that we're adding from a financial perspective to the community. So I completely support that discussion. How we get there might be tricky, but I think it's a good idea to have that discussion.
Yeah. Can we add this as a discussion item for the first performance committee meeting of next year? Be able to procedurally do that?
I will say yes from my vantage point, but we'll work with the board office to ensure that that comes to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other comments, questions, discussion? Script keeps disappearing. Seeing none, we will now call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action? Hearing and seeing no no's with 4 ayes, 0 no's, and 0 abstentions, that motion passes. As a reminder, this item will move forward to the special board meeting scheduled for Tuesday, December 6th at 5:30 p.m. There is one discussion item on the agenda this afternoon. I would kindly the GM CEO employment agreement and compensation analysis. I would kindly ask Melanie Snyder, General Counsel, to present this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you give me just a moment, let me share my screen. Okay, are you all seeing my screen now?
Yes, General Counsel, we can now see it in presentation format.
Okay, great. Let me just move this one thing. Okay, terrific. Good afternoon. I'm Melanie Snyder, General Counsel. Today, I'm going to take just a few moments to go over and give a high-level refresher on the GM and CEO's employment agreement, and then we'll hear from the Gallagher team of consultants who conducted a compensation analysis. Okay, RTD and GM CEO Johnson entered into a 5-year employment agreement in November 2020. Among other things, this agreement includes provisions for base salary and benefits and an annual performance appraisal framework based on board-approved strategic plan performance metrics. It also provides for adjusting base salary, taking into account market considerations, as well as incentive pay when she meets or exceeds performance goals. Under the agreement, compensation includes base salary and an automatic annual cost of living adjustment based on the Denver Aurora Lakewood Consumer Price Index, effective on each employment anniversary date. The GM CEO is eligible for the same benefits package as non-represented employees, and she accrues paid time off at the 20+ years service level. Here's a snapshot of the salary adjustments that have occurred since the beginning of the GM CEO's employment with RTD in November 2020. As you can see, last year there was a 4.5% COLA increase on her first anniversary date. Following the 2021 performance review, the board then approved a 6% increase to the original base salary. This was not on top of the COLA, it was on the original base. Then on her second anniversary date last week, a 7.7% COLA was applied, bringing her to the current salary you see here. The performance appraisal framework is grounded in the board adopted strategic plan goals and metrics, with 50% of the evaluation based on the objective success outcomes and 50% based on the subjective values. Each year, the GM and CEO has the opportunity to submit a self-appraisal to highlight and self-assess her performance over the performance period. As you know, this year, she provided this to the board on November 8th. Each director individually has the opportunity to provide input toward the board's collective adoption of a final appraisal. 5 p.m. this Friday is the deadline for individual director feedback this year. As we previously discussed, the committee will hold an executive session next week on November 22nd with GM CEO Johnson. This will be an opportunity for the board to provide her with performance feedback and to discuss potential compensation adjustments. On November 30th, there'll be a recommended action in this committee to adopt the final written appraisal. This would also be the date that the committee would recommend action on any compensation adjustment resulting from the appraisal or the compensation analysis we're about to hear from Gallagher. On December, pardon me?
Quickly, I see Ms. Johnson and Chair Busick.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to call everybody's attention to the slide before you. The last bullet should say 11/18/2022, not 11/21. Just as a point of clarification. So, Ms. Snyder, sorry for jumping in, but
no, thank you for that correction.
Yes. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Chair Busick, are you good? Thank you. Apologies, Ms. Snyder, please.
No, that's okay. Sorry about that. And then on December 6th, the full board will take final action on these items. Okay, finally, here's the framework for how incentive pay is determined. Utilizing the compensation analysis from the Gallagher team, the board will determine what percentage increase is appropriate to align the compensation for this position with the market. Once that percentage is determined, the performance appraisal will then guide the distribution of that percentage. 50% will go toward the adjusted base salary and 50% to a one-time incentive payment, with the detail of those with that detail broken out on this slide. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions unless you'd prefer to hold all questions on this discussion item until after we hear from the Gallagher team.
Any questions thus far? No. Okay, I'll give it back to you or to the Gallagher team.
Okay, I will turn it over now to Derek Smith. He is leading the Gallagher team, and ask him to please introduce himself and the members of the Gallagher team.
Thank you, Melanie. Yes, my name is Derek Smith. I am the project manager for this particular project for RTD Denver. I also have with me in the audience Eric Samantana, who's a project director for Gallagher Consulting. I have Jamie Parker, who's also a consultant who worked on this project for Gallagher Consulting. And I also have Genesis Roberts, who's associate consultant who worked on this project for Gallagher Consulting. We're going to show you a presentation. It's about 20 slides long. In there, we'll have summaries and explanations of what we did. And I'm just getting ready to put that up. So I'm having one of my colleagues present that. Let me know when you're ready and you can see the screen. Okay, excellent. I can see the screen, so I assume everyone else can as well. So this is for the position of General Manager, Chief Executive Officer, Comp and Bench Market Analysis. It's for RTD Denver, November 2022. I will be using acronyms for the title, such as GM and CEO, and I will be using acronyms for your organization, such as RTD. Okay. All right. So we're going to go to the table of contents, and it lists all the things that on slide 2, if we can move to that, all the things that we will be discussing in these 20 or so slides. So we'll have the introduction, comp philosophies, thoughts, methodology, published data, custom survey, comparator groups, accepted variance, published data outcome, custom survey, and then those various things for the market review. And then finally, the internal pay equity analysis, as well as the conclusion and recommendation. So let's go to the third slide and talk about the introduction. The purpose of this for this study was to really see how competitive the GEO salary is. This particular job, it's only one job, so it's one benchmark job. And this should help us inform you as a group about how to decide on executive compensation, as well as total compensation for the GEO salary in comparison to market analysis. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that there's about 3 different ways to view market data and to apply or implement it for your organization. And the first being market aware. So you see there's a graphic there, and that means that we know that the average or the 50th percent, the median of the market is what we call market aware. Anything below that, closer to 25%, is lagging the market, meaning the salaries aren't as high. They don't meet what would be in the middle of the market. And anything above that 50%, closer to 75%, would be leading the market, meaning you have a higher salary for positions like this, and that you want to be not just competitive meeting the market, but you want to be the leader in market as far as pay goes. But keeping that in mind, you may already have made decisions about that. And so please reference this type of thinking about comp philosophy as we go forward and examine and review the data together. So we're going to talk about the published data we used. We didn't just use public data, but we will talk about that first. We'll talk about also the custom survey as well. But listed below are the different types of public data we use. I think you already referenced APTA, which is the American Public Transportation Association. We use their information. We used ERI, which is the Economic Research Institute. And then we used another suite of surveys called Comp Data. And that was what we used for all our published surveys. So let's talk about what those public surveys did more specifically. So Comp Data has different cuts that we have there. It's definitely from 2022. As I said, it's a suite, so that means it's multiple surveys. We use data that is published regarding national data, Western region, also Colorado, and not-for-profit data. Now, notice that that does not hone in just on the industry. That's not what this data does. It is for general managers and CEOs that are in these different data cuts. So they may be outside of transportation. Keep that in mind when we review the data, because that could impact the numbers, and you'll see why we say that. ERI data, on the other hand, actually does have a category for transportation, but it also has a national data cut as well. And APTA, as you very well know, is very specific towards the transportation industry. But when we use data from Comp Data and things that aren't from the industry, we realize that some of these positions have equivalent type of functions and or responsibilities, but they may not be in this particular industry. So that's why we utilize them. And that's why they are a part of this actual research. So now we're going to talk about the custom survey. And just to keep in mind what a custom survey is, a custom survey means that we create what information we're looking for and who we ask to fill out that information. So we actually asked about 20 organizations, but we did receive information back from 13. We'll show that graphic in a bit. Our basic 4 areas are up here of what we asked for. And so that includes base salary, which is obviously one of the more important ones, incentive comp, other types of benefits, and executive perks. And so executive perks may be things like vehicle allowances, retiree health insurance, stipends, executive life insurance, just to give you kind of some examples of what some of the executive perks we would have or did ask about. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. This shows you the names of the organizations for our custom survey that are in the transportation industry. So this is an industry survey that we just utilized in the last few weeks. The ones that are in green, highlighted in green, responded. Out of the 20, that was 13 that responded. The ones that were in white did not respond. And so that's about a 65% response rate, which is actually pretty good for a custom survey in that amount of time. So enough, more than enough data points for us to have a good study to reference from. Okay, so now we're going to go and talk about variances. So before we actually look at the data that we received, there are about 4 different categories here of how we would categorize how the data is in comparison to the GM, CEO, RTD salary. So if it is plus or minus that number, we consider that highly competitive. If it is a little bit more out than -5 all the way up to -5 or +10, that's somewhat that's competitive as well. But if it's higher or lower than -5, or excuse me, -10 or +10, then we consider that potentially misaligned. And in most cases, when it is -15 or +15 higher, depending on the category, we consider that misaligned as well, not just potentially misaligned. So those are kind of the categories. Don't worry, you don't have to memorize that. We will put them on the applicable tables when we show them in this PowerPoint slide. So the first thing we're going to look at is the published data. Now, remember, I said that this is collected from all different industries, but they have similar functions and they're national. So that may skew the data. In this case, it made the 50th percentile pretty high. So if you look at the second row there, that's the benchmark summary. The second column that says market 25th, that's that lagging or that lower number for salaries according to the published survey. The middle where it says market 50th average is basically the average amount that everyone paid. The percentages before and after it indicate whether or not it was aligned or misaligned according to that table. And of course, the market 75th is that maximum salary that we saw with published surveys. The last row of that first table is the incumbent salary. So in comparison, we are above the market 25th with that salary according to published data only. We will look at both published and custom survey, and we'll also look at a third factor of combining those two to make sure that we have a good understanding of all the numbers. So you can see that it's a little below though, misalignment with market possibly if we only went by the published data by 17%, even after the increase. So you can see there that we've had that color coded. And so I'm now going to move on to what we have as far as collection of the custom survey. Now remember, this custom survey on this next slide is for those that are in the transportation industry and similarly situated cities that have similar budgets and or employees, number of employees. Now, as you can see, when you look at the same columns the same references for salary, you can see it's a different story. You can see that, yes, well above the 25th threshold in the transportation industry for a custom survey, our incumbent salary, and a little above or above the 50th percentile for the custom survey, but yet within range of the 75th percentile. So once again, remember, 25th is kind of lagging the industry average. The 50th is being aware of the industry average, and the 75th is leading the industry, meaning you're paying top dollar compared to everyone else. So there's two different stories here. When we look at the published surveys that include much more than just industry, but it does also include industry, the salaries are much higher. When we look at custom surveys, the salary are more in line with what we're paying here. So let's look at the combination of all three. And that's where you see that now a third row that says benchmark summary, full market, and has an asterisk next to it. So when we combine those numbers together, we can see, yes, it's well above the 25th as a combined summary of benchmarks for both custom and published surveys. It's much more closer to the 50th. In fact, it's only about 3% off. And so we would call that highly competitive with market according to our chart below. It's still a bit off from the 75th, which is not bad because typically the 75th is not only just to lead the market, but it is also for extraordinary circumstances. Let's say you have somebody with a lot of tenure and they've been there for quite a bit of time. Well, they've had an ability to go through this pay range, and they should be much more higher than the 50th because they're not just coming in towards the market. They've been there in that position, so they typically are compensated higher. So this is a good review of how all three of these look. I think if we look at the next slide, you can get a better visual here. And yes, here we go. So let me explain this as well, because it shows both with vertical columns what the incumbents, RTD's GM CEO's salary is as a yellow column, a yellow mark there, but it also has a dotted red horizontal line that compares it across both the benchmark summary for published and custom data, as well as that third chart right on there, the third lines of that data for those combined, the full market. And so as you look at either the yellow bar in each cluster of bars or the red dotted line, you can see how the salary compares to other items. So pretty close when we talk about the 50th for the summary of all the data, pretty close for the published data, and well above the custom survey data. So we have other items that we did review, as we talked about before, in the table of contents. In fact, there's other ways that GMs and CEOs receive pay in the industry. In this particular chart, we're just looking at COLA and merit. There was information that we collected about bonus. Not very many people did it, only 2. So we really didn't put that up there. But as you can see, looking at the comparators data for both COLA and merit, we average that out so you can have a comparison there. And if you look at the information for COLA, for comp data comparators, as well as the medium, it's about 3%, and the same thing for merit. If you look at the national survey data, which is something that we got from the World of Work, the data is a little bit lower. And then if you look at the last row of data for your employee, GM CEO for RTD, it's a little bit higher than both of those. So you're very competitive with that. In fact, you're leading in these areas as far as these type of pay practices when you talk about COLA and merit. Do keep in mind that not many people actually contributed bonus pay, but then when we look that information up at World at Work, if you did decide to do bonus pay, which is outside of COLA and merit, that would be another additional 3.5%, which it looks like you kind of made up for with these two pay differences between the national survey and the average of our other data that we collected. So when we talk about pay and pay practices, that's great. That's good information to know as well. However, total rewards takes in other things. And so we're going to, as we explained before, talk about benefits. And so we have an overall summary here. We can go into more detail about what this actually means in the next few slides, but I just wanted to put it into two different buckets here. There are the buckets of these 13 different types of benefits that we did a custom survey on or that we researched. About 5 of them pretty much match market. The others you either did not offer, such as vehicle allowance, club membership, and items like that, or what was offered wasn't as competitive as some of the rates, and we will look at those rates. So let's go down and go to the first big bucket of benefits, which is the defined contribution. So this is more dealing with how we deal with retirement. We don't necessarily have the employee's contribution, nor do we need to know that, but we do know what the employer's contribution is. And just in comparison, we're close to that 11% that employers reported back to us that they pay. At RTD, we have about a 9%. I would start saying it's uncompetitive if it was much lower than this. Let's say anywhere from a 6 to a 4%, then I would say it's not competitive. 9% is within striking range. It doesn't necessarily match the 11%, but we would consider that contribution to be competitive. The next bigger bucket, and this I think is the biggest bucket of benefits, are things that most come to mind when people talk about benefits, not necessarily the defined contribution for retirement per se all the time, even though that is a big one, but when we talk about things like medical, dental, and vision. So as you can see, the first category of medical in that kind of second column there, the comparators reported back to us of those 13 people that we looked at, those 13 organizations, that they have about 88% employer contribution for medical insurance, which is pretty good. But RTD Denver has a range depending on which plan is selected that not only encompasses that, but it goes a little bit below it and a little bit higher. So I think that's an excellent example of how you're competitive with market. That's a great example of a good benefit for this position. When we look at dental, we're a little bit off with that one as far as RTD is concerned. It's about 10% lower. So there's room to increase that. I wouldn't say that that's misaligned. I would say that's somewhat competitive. However, when we look at vision, I would call that misaligned. It's a much larger percentage difference. And so you may want to consider that when you do review items like this in the upcoming future. The premiums that are paid and what we found here, that may be something to consider as a change or something that you just need to review and see if it's something you do want to change. We're going to move on now to the next bit of information here. Well, before we do that, actually, let me talk about PTO because we did look at that as well. We did look at time off and just give you the numbers verbally. So PTO for the market was about 36 days. RTD Denver offers about 32 days. However, a very good note here on your behalf is that there are 3 to 4 floating holidays. Not many people reported doing that. And so that's excellent that you have that. But I think that gives you a good understanding of your PTO and floating holidays and time off. So I would say very competitive with that information. I will answer questions a little bit at the end. So I know I have one pending and I'll definitely get to that question. So if you can save that until I get to the end of this report, we're almost done. Okay, going on to the next slide. One other aspect of this report was looking at pay compression. Just looking at the competitiveness of the pay. I'm going to tell you what we were looking at first is just your incumbents, non-represented RTD employees, those people who could be subordinates. We want to make sure that with our methodology that it follows at least a 20% difference in pay between the GM CEO position and the subordinates pay. In our findings, we found that there was really no one that was closer than 20%. In fact, The closest distance was 37%. What that will tell you, though, is that there may be, depending on what information that you have from your other studies, because I do realize you're doing another comp study, I believe with Simpson Siegel about employee pay, is that there may be some wiggle room to increase their pay if seen reasonable. So now we're going to get down to kind of the last couple pages here, which is basically the conclusion and recommendations for salary. So we smoothed out these ranges as far as what we would recommend. Just so you know, we do think overall that the salary right now is reasonable. It has room to grow, obviously, to get up to leading the market, and in some cases, a little bit closer to the mid. It's just fine if we use the full market data. We recommend that you give the employee a chance to move through the range before making any adjustments, and the continued movement is really helpful. We also really emphasize that you should review the compensation system, whatever you have set up or take in for our recommendations going forward, and make sure it's relevant with market data and that it's competitive so that you can maintain the position of the GM CEO with your incumbent. The position that we have on here is that we have two different recommendations and two different thoughts for these recommendations. So the first recommendation is that range that you see there below, kind of a 300 to about 465 max with a mid of about 385. That gives that incumbent salary of 374 some room to grow. It's very consistent with what we saw from other pay from your other positions that are there. But what really, I think if we use the combination of what we got from the market data, we would really emphasize using recommendation number 2 more than 1, but those would be the 2 recommendations that we would have. The reason for recommendation number 2 is the combination of both the custom data, custom survey data, and the published data. And so it gives it a little bit more width as far as the range spread. You can see the difference there. So there's a more longevity within that range before you max out at that 490 spot. And if there happens to be some change in the future, and for whatever reason, you may need to bring in somebody new in some years to come, you still have the ability to flexibly be lower with that range at 280 as well. But overall, we thought that the salary, the total compensation for the GM CEO is equitable and is reasonable, and that it's competitive with executive jobs in the market at this level of compensation. And it allows for potential opportunities to grow and increase overall compensation as it aligns with market trends now and in the future. So now that was the entire presentation. I know that I had at least one question pending, and so I'm more than happy, as well as my team, to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Smith. Directors, any questions? I have 2. The first is, Director Cook, go ahead.
Go right ahead, please.
Okay. The first is on health insurance and whether that's really a meaningful measurement given the variety of benefits that come and the negotiating power of the company, how much the company covers and doesn't cover. How do you guys really justify percent of employer covering health insurance as the metric to use when really the benefits that you receive under each individualized plan vary so widely?
Good question. That's why we had a range. So at the lowest amount, you're at about 82%, but they also have an option going even higher than what the market is. So the best way we can do it is the percentage, because a lot of people, it's an expense out of pocket. And so it is seen in many circumstances as a takeaway from their total pay. And so when we talk about total rewards, benefits are always a part of that, even though it may not be cash money that you receive in a form of a paycheck, it is savings in your pay account. So to your point, it's tricky. They could select a lower contributing plan, but they have the option to select the higher contributing one. And so, you know, it's one thing that you can take and, you know, assume that, you know, that could be somewhat of a variable there, and it may not be as a higher factor to consider as some of these other things that are very much fixed, such as you know, deferred comp and or base pay. So that's really up for you as a board to really decide. I would recommend that you give it a little bit of consideration, because people do see that cost as something that impacts their total comp.
Yeah, I hear you. I have a different opinion, because I'd rather have a health plan where my employer might cover less of it, but when I go to the doctor, I don't have to pay anything out of pocket, versus an employer who covers 100% of my health plan but doesn't cover anything and everything's out of network. Obviously, the reality is somewhere in the middle. My second question, or more of a comment, is you know, your recommendations really only focused on the base comp aspect. So at 374, with a 7, you know, if we have call it a 7% adjustment, we will be 400,000, 180-ish. If we were to increase to 385 and drop it down to 4%, consistent with the rest of the raises, the GM and CEO's comp would actually go down year over year, right? We would outpace that. Given the amount of increase we give year over year, we would outpace the market by year 2, and in year 3 would be a market leader. Is that a fair assessment of your recommendation? Or is your recommendation just only looking at that one bottom line, which is the base salary?
Yes, and I hopefully I'm understanding you correctly. The actual base salary that we're looking at is essentially something that you would have to review year over year. Right now, it's within striking distance of market. So I'm not telling you that you automatically need to raise it to, you know, that market by next year. And in fact, I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm telling you to consider, if you are going to raise it, to do it incrementally and keep aware of how far you may be from market each time you do raise it. And that may change each year when you look at what the actual average is. But ranges move up and down year over year, mainly up, considering, you know, what is going on in society, whether it be inflation, you know, cost of living, things like that. And of course, you've added in, it looks like merit and COLA. And I think you do that annually. I know you did it recently. So there may not be a need to actually change the entire base salary every year. It's just something that you should keep aware of, that market number. And as a person becomes more tenured in a position, then maybe it might be called for time to change it that year. Because we're falling either below or too close to market when they maybe need to be leading and above market.
Got it. Thank you. Director Cook.
Chair, I don't need to cut in front of your committee members. If you'd like, I can wait until others are done.
You can proceed.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Smith, I had the 2010 audit, and I can see echoes of the recommendations of that audit in your presentation. So based on that and Melanie's suggestion that she had provided that, and you all had used that as part of your input, I appreciate that. One piece of that 2010 audit recommended being really clear about the selection of your peer group, identifying the criteria. So for your comparators, the largely transit agencies, and where you were able to get 65% response, what was your criteria for selecting that group?
So we talked with the project manager, Melanie Snyder, about which ones were utilized in the other study that you were doing, I believe, with Siegel. And we knew that they had already supplied information, so we thought that would be a good baseline. But mostly our recommendation was you want to have information that is very much comparable as far as the cities, the number of employees, the amount of revenue that they're dealing with, things like that. We don't want to compare apples and oranges. So for instance, you may have a very large metropolitan city, it may be too big, or there may be a very small organization. We wouldn't recommend doing that. And these seem to be somewhat similar in typical range of this type of information.
Sounds a little squishy, which maybe it has to be just a matter of judgment, but they acted like you needed to define criteria and then screen based on that, you know, whether it's number of employees or service area, but you're suggesting you took all those kinds of things into account and then kind of made a judgment in each case, is what you're saying?
Yeah, you have to. There's not going to be, well, if you live there, there's not going to be a city exactly like your city. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's not, you know, a million cities like that, or even enough. And we wanted to have 5 data points to be statistically relevant. And in doing this, especially when you look at APTA data and other information like this, this is pretty much what leads the market, is people collecting information about what would be somebody that's similarly situated, not exactly situated, but similarly situated. And so, you know, when you look at industries, there may be 2 cities that are exactly alike, but getting 5 cities that are exactly alike, to your point, there is some subjectivity there in the selection.
Okay. And the second thing has to do with the lack of Colorado data. We were also called out a little bit in that audit for not having compared as much as we could have or should have with other governmental agencies within Colorado. If I understood your slide, none of the Colorado agencies responded to a survey. Is that what you had?
Well, no, there was Colorado information. It was in the published surveys.
Okay.
Yeah, so don't just go by that list. That list is the custom survey that we created especially just for RTD. Mm-hmm. And it was recently put in there. So we have way more information. There was actually a cut for Colorado in the published survey. I believe it was, let me go back and look and see what it is. I have it written down here. It was in the comp data, that suite, that 2022 suite. Remember when I showed you that table of different surveys? There was actually a Western region and a Colorado data cut in there as well, and a nonprofit data cut. So we did get Colorado data from the published surveys, but not from the custom survey.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, I'm done.
Thank you, Director Cook. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple points, and one is to Director Cook's question. So that Colorado data that you showed, can that be aggregated, or can you break that out so that we can see what the representative sample was in that? So we can say, I just was curious.
I don't think that we can. I believe that has to be aggregated just for, you know, legal purposes.
Okay. And then my second point to Director DeShel's earlier comments about health, dental, and vision insurance, was that just comparing CEOs across the board, or did that really factor in the overall health insurance package for the agency as a whole?
So for me, I believe what you're asking, what I'm understanding from you, is you're asking about when we looked at the health insurance data. Is that correct?
Yes.
That was, okay. That was a comparison for industry. That was the custom data. So yeah, that was the industry. So that would be transportation organizations.
I just wanted to make sure that we weren't comparing general manager, CEO compensation for that particular area that was not consistent with the agency as a whole.
You're correct. We didn't do that for the benefits part. We did that for more of the salary part.
Okay.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on those previous questions. The published survey data, which is where you have the Colorado data, can you describe for us more, how much of that is private industry, what kind of jobs? Those weren't just transportation, they were a broad range of industries, right?
Yep, that's correct. So you can have CEOs, and there were CEOs for transportation. There may be some there from IT or other industries that made that amount larger, but they do have similar kind of responsibilities as a GM CEO. I mean, the base pay is generally competitive to the market overall, but it was slightly leading in the comparator group and slightly lagging broader industry. So that could mean that an executive challenge is in the region across industries, and those skill sets are highly transferable. So that's why we use that comparison.
And in Colorado, you're not comparing to other like state agencies or anything like that, right?
No, the Colorado information, I don't believe it was nonprofit. It was not the category of government state agencies.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Gessinger. Just for clarity's sake, though, in Colorado, you are required to post a salary band for every single job posting. So while it wasn't done here for Colorado and now New York City, you should be able to know exactly how much everyone gets paid within a band, in addition to the fact that it's public information at the executive level. And is there something I'm missing in that?
The survey itself has other information that's not just Colorado. That's probably the part that makes it difficult to disaggregate that aggregated data. And so, only through a special process of getting a waiver, assuring that, we're not, going against the Sherman Antitrust Act, do we do something like that?
Okay, got it. Well, are there any other questions or comments from the committee? All right, Mr. Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us. Let us know if you have any questions, and it was a pleasure working with the board as well as Melanie Snyder. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As a reminder, are there any other matters to discuss? As a reminder, the 2022 GM CEO Performance Appraisal Survey must be completed by Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. Late submissions will not be accepted or included, so it's very important that everyone complete the survey sooner rather than later. Our next meeting date is Tuesday, November 22nd.
Chair Deschel, I see hands raised.
Oh, there are hands raised. Wonderful. Director Sloan, thank you. Director Sloan, you were on mute.
And I considered raising it before when you were talking about next year's committee. I think next year's committee could have a much more active role in setting policy for this. Just one small example is the survey form. And again, I hope this has not gone into the same hole in my brain, but I don't remember reviewing the survey form before it went out to the board members. And I would have had at least one suggestion on it, and I'm sure other committee meetings or committee members would also have some input. So I believe there's a more active role that the performance committee can play in the future. So that is my other matter, and it's linked to your idea about the future of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sloan. Ms. Snyder.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to note for the committee and the other board members present that Gallagher is preparing a full written report that has a number of appendices. So they are in the process of finalizing that, and the aim is to get that out by this Friday at the latest. So you will get that via email.
Wonderful. Thank you. Director Cook.
Yeah, just to follow on, since I'd been reading through the 2010 audit, just to add this support for Marjorie's, Director Sloan's remarks just now. They talk about the board retaining a consultant to do the benchmarking or to do other work. So I do feel like it's better placed in that realm rather than away from the board. I don't think there was much visibility into how the study was structured or overseen. And I believe it would have been better for the board to have overseen that. And that assumption that the board would do it was, evident throughout that 2010 report where it talked about the board and the board overseeing, the board retaining the consultant, et cetera. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask the question if a time had been selected for the November 22nd committee meeting, because if so, I have not been apprised. And then if I could, secondly, just say, as related to Director Cook's comment, I want to state for the record that I had no involvement. This is the first time I have seen the presentation. So as relates to any involvement, I just wanted to clarify that I, nor members of my office directly were involved, and General Counsel coordinated that, I believe, with, the chair as well as with the committee chair. So just wanted to state that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. I similarly do not know what time our meeting is on the 22nd. Board office, have we been able to finish up polling?
Hi, Director Deschel. So I have not heard back from Committee Chair Lewis, but it looks like the rest of the committee was available at 12.
Okay. Ms. Snyder.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had another matter related to this, but not on the time. So if we can round that out.
Mine was on the time, and I would just say, recognizing today is the 16th, I would encourage the committee to collectively decide if, in fact, the meeting will be held at noon. Several of us have holds on our calendars, and I don't want to come across as being off-puttish, but it would be helpful if we could discern what a time is, and considering the vast majority of committee members, and I'm not trying to leave out the committee chair, but I would encourage you all to collectively decide when the time is, recognizing all the other commitments that we have going forward. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll go back to Ms. Snyder.
Okay, I just wanted to note for the record that as Chairman CEO Johnson noted, that the scope of work for the retention of the Gallagher consultant that was reviewed by Chair Busick and then the chair and vice chair of this committee. And I'm happy to share that as well.
Thank you. Director Cow.
I responded to the request from Ty Shrey for meeting time preference, and I believe I stated that I would prefer to keep it at the noon time frame.
Yes, she noted everyone would prefer. She noted everyone
okay,
except Chair Lewis, who we haven't heard back from.
So can we just decide that we will have it then?
Is Chair Lewis or is Director Lewis scheduled to be at the dinner tonight?
She is, yes.
Okay. Why don't we talk to her? I will speak with her tonight at the dinner. Let's plan on 12 unless you hear otherwise.
That sounds good for some of us who are trying to plan around that. I appreciate it.
I'm in that same boat. Chair Busick, you had a hand and now it's gone.
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Great. Any other matters? Okay, our next meeting date is Tuesday, November 22nd, tentatively scheduled for 12 p.m. to be finalized by tomorrow morning. The board office, you will get a final update from the board office. Seeing no other discussion, this meeting is adjourned at 2:42 p.m. Thank you all so much.